Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here with Kieran and Antonio, who kindly agreed to take the time from their busy schedules to talk to us about some of the more sort of non-academia related matters that nevertheless surround or follow from network research. And to me, actually, this has always been a little bit of a blind spot, because even though we as network community like to portray ourselves as not only a primary research-focused community generating cumulative sum of knowledge, but we also like to pride ourselves really upon the fact that what we do can have real-world implications and can be used for improving, well, human conditions, but also can be used to a great extent in day-to-day operations in organizations, businesses, and markets. We still would every now and then tend to forget that that's the case, and we would sort of causally close ourselves within the sort of walls of our ivory tower that is academia. And so it's great to actually have the two of you here to talk with us a little bit about what's going on outside that sort of ivory tower, and to give us a little bit of flash of how can network researchers or researchers who have network background, how can they navigate sort of the world outside of academia, and how can they actually make a difference in day-to-day lives or even in the grander scheme of things, and perhaps how it might be complicated as well. So once again, thanks a lot for joining us. And I guess for our audience now, but also for the people who might be viewing this later, could you guys just say a little bit, a few sentences about yourself, so introducing yourselves and your career and what you're sort of doing right now? I guess, Kieran, let's go first. You're the first one on my screen, so.
All right. So I'm Kieran. I did my PhD in Christoph Stadtfeld's lab at the ETH with Alvaro and Sue. That I finished that in 2022. I'd actually come from a background in psychology and then in more like a social psychological degree in migration and ethnic relations. And then following that, I was kind of in two minds about whether or not to leave academia. There were like practical reasons that I wanted to. And I ended up doing an internship at Swiss Airlines, so it's part of Lufthansa Group, and then briefly returned to academia for like a couple of months, and then found a job doing sort of contract work for Google. So now a lot of my day-to-day is surveys, analysis of surveys, kind of helping a bit with sort of experimental design type things.
Great, thanks a lot. And Antonio, how about you?
Thanks, Tom. Yes, my name is Antonio. It's Antonio Reyes. I hope you can listen to me well. Yeah. Okay, great. I am currently a research analyst for UNDP, that is the United Nations Development Program. I work in New York City for the Human Development Report Office. And a little bit, I'm pretty sure we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but a little bit more about my background is that I do have a PhD in political science and international development from University College London, where I had the privilege of having Philip Agnesens, that you know, Tom, as one of my supervisors, but as well Christian Schuster and many other people that were related to my project. Basically, my PhD was analyzing governance networks. That is how governments partner with the private sector, civil society, universities, and many other stakeholders in order to deliver a public good. I was fascinated by that type of alliances and collaboration, and mostly because it became some sort of sustainable development goal, right? To provide this sort of, to nourish this type of partnerships in order to reduce the burden to governments. So I was fascinated about that, and I thought, well, I think this is an excellent context to be studied, to be explored through social network analysis. So that was great, because actually my background is public policy, political science. So I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about this later on, but to translate all this information, the data analysis, the data collection was something that really enriched my experience, and it is basically what I am doing right now at the UNDP when it comes to try to explore the most challenging problems that pretty much humanity is facing right now. That is political polarization, that is climate change, and the penetration of big technologies like AI, and how that is changing the way how we understand development in countries. So I'll leave it there. But yeah, happy to be here with you again, guys.
Thanks a lot, Antonio. Fascinating stuff. Okay, so the first question really follows up on this, and that is, what would you say in the careers and the pathways that you've sort of gone through, what were the key turning points and key decisions that you had to make, in the sense of, did you really plan for this to turn out, for your career in general to turn out this way, or was it a bit more opportunistic? Because Kieran already hinted at this, but still, what are your takes? What were the key moments, key decisions that you had to take?
Kieran, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I was just going to say, are we going to stick to me then, Antonio?
Okay, for simplicity, let's stick to that order, yeah.
So for me, I took a few months off after I graduated. That was at the end of 2022. There were like some life events, and then, you also kind of want to rest a bit. After that, I applied to a lot of jobs. I had the constraint that I really wanted to stay in Switzerland. My partner is finishing her PhD here. So obviously then I would rather stay around. And of course, Switzerland's very nice. And I had already got some friends who'd joined Google previously. So I knew, like, from that perspective, like, the research side of it sounded quite fun. There's a lot of room to try things out. But at the same time, I was wondering a bit, like, did I want to do something where I focused more on something beneficial directly for like humanity in a sense, or something that I'm more focused on, like, fun kinds of things. And honestly, at the time, I applied to so many things, and the job market was just, Google had just had their massive rounds of layoffs, and there were very, very few jobs that I was even getting interviewed for, especially because I was in quite a constrained market. The Swiss internship, as in Swiss Airlines internship, I applied to on kind of a whim. It was one of several things, and that was the thing that I happened to get first. I also interviewed at a psychiatric clinic for like a data analytics, data science position. Also at a bank, one of the banks that folded around that time, so that job didn't work out either. But yeah, and I think Swiss was good for me. Also, I mean, I picked up some very, like, good friends from there as well, but also you really get to see something else than academia, and get used to the idea that there's different ways of communicating with non-scientists. There's also different, like, standards of, like, speed versus depth of the kind of research that you do. And I think for me that was pretty good to see how that worked, and also to see that the skills that I've built in academia were appreciated. So in that sense, I was quite comfortable with doing that kind of work. So after this internship ended, there was a job that I was a strong candidate for, and then there was a reorg, and then that job was taken away again, which in some ways I think was lucky, because otherwise I would not have ended up in the role that I'm in now. So in between, I then ended up going back into academia for a bit. I still wasn't really committed either way, but I figured there was a job in Switzerland, so this worked out well for me on a life perspective. It was still in S&A, so I could use skills that I already had. But then this kind of contract thing for Google came up, and I was like, well, I have to try this now. And honestly, the job is super enjoyable, so I'm very glad in that sense. But, market's constrained. It's always difficult finding the next kind of opportunities from there. But I definitely think I'm appreciating some things that I didn't appreciate in academia. And also learning to appreciate what I had in some aspects of academia as well. So I think for me these were like the key points, but really it was not a very planned route. I kind of knew what the goals were, but you kind of have to take the opportunities as they come.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. That's very interesting. How about you, Antonio?
Yes. Well, my experience is, after finishing my PhD at UCL, I think I moved quite naturally into the multilateral world and international development field, because I think I was a little bit disappointed with academia. Most of my PhD was this sort of fresh being publishing and always having something out there in the market of knowledge. I think I frustrated with that kind of system, but most importantly, it was because I felt the distance. I felt the dislocation between, proper research in academia, as you mentioned, is like talking from the ivory tower. So I felt that, and towards the end of my PhD, that is a year and a half before my PhD was finishing, I started focusing more in the practitioner world and having some applications. But a big turning point, I would say, for me was a visiting period at the Yale Institute for Network Science. So I had the pleasure to work with Nicholas Christakis and his team about how to use social network analysis in very down-to-earth projects, not necessarily, talking about board of directors and social dynamics in teams, for example, in offices. They were really doing things very interesting with science and many cross-sector fields that I found especially interesting. And that was kind of the first window that I saw, social network analysis has other kind of applications where you can actually collaborate with multiple other stakeholders, not necessarily academia. So that experience made me realize that this type of tools, but also other background that I developed throughout my PhD, like behavioral insights, mixed methods, had a real potential beyond academia. So my first step after my PhD, towards the end of my PhD, was joining the Inter-American Development Bank. So I was doing my PhD in London, but working at the same time for Washington for the IDB, where I work on transparency and integrity issues, including applying network analysis to cross-border financial flows using huge data sets from SWIFT, which is this organization which is based in London, that they keep a track of any financial transaction around the world from all the financial institutions and banks. So that was very interesting for me as well, how to apply social networks into a broader sphere of a broader topic with huge implications for security, for identification of illegal activities, terrorism, funds, and corruption. So that was very interesting for me in that project, where I actually applied the things that I learned from network analysis. After that, I moved to the OECD, which is the Organization for Economic and Cooperation Development in Paris, where I led a rollout of regulatory governance indicators across 38 or more countries. And it was a little bit more about data analysis, but I also got engaged in a very interesting project there at the OECD, something that it was smaller in my portfolio, but where I used social network analysis, and it was that I help governments in Italian cities to track diseases, about people getting diseases from food poisoning. So we were using a data set that coming from Yelp, from tweets in Twitter back then, in order to track potential areas of these problems with food safety. So that was another way to use network analysis that was very interesting. And I would say that, throughout my career, just echoing what Kieran said, hasn't been linear. It's about taking opportunities, as he said. But it's also about, following your intuition, following your gut on how you want to apply and implement what you have learned. Back to you.
Thanks a lot. Both of your answers were fascinating, and it's really, really cool to actually listen to all the things that you considered and all the opportunities that you have taken and considered. And this actually nicely bridges into the next question. And that is, well, in network analysis, and in network research in general, we sort of draw upon this huge well of methodological training and theoretical knowledge, and also just general data scientific/data analytics skills that, as you yourself portrayed, are key to getting a good job, meaningful job, and a job that can potentially also make a difference. Which specific, say, skills that are both from the network analysis background, but also perhaps beyond or neighboring or maybe even completely remote from SNA, which of those skills and base of knowledge would you say were the key things that helped you navigate your career and also to sort of help you to be such cool and great researchers that you are?
So I could reject the premise. Maybe I'm not that great a researcher, but I think, honestly, a lot of it is not so much SNA specific, but a lot of the things that I had to pick up to be able to do SNA. I mean, R coding, super useful. As much as I will say that LLMs are also reducing the need for me to actually code, you still need to be able to verify what the code is doing because it still has issues, and you need to still understand how to prompt properly and things. But I think thinking a lot about code, thinking a lot about like your data's origins, data provenance, I suppose is the term that would be preferred. Also, of course, like more on the statistical side. So, I mean, now a lot of things that I do will be simple, like t-test type stuff, but it's also good to understand a bit like about permutation tests for when you've violated assumptions or like different distributions that you can use in models depending on what kind of data you're analyzing. So I think the big ones are understanding a bit about data provenance, data engineering, which are things that then sound very sort of industry oriented, but it's just the kind of cleaning and stuff that you're used to from academia, maybe joining stuff together, and like solid understanding of statistical analysis, including the stat modeling, threats to like good experimental design, that kind of stuff. I think that's particularly useful. Maybe more so on the job than applying for the job, because when you're applying for the job, especially when you just need to get past the first hurdle, these are not things that you're going to talk about in depth in your CV usually, unless it's very, very specific to the job. But being able to say like, hey, I'm able to do a bit of R, I understand causal inference a bit, of course, is valuable. I think, yeah, from my perspective, I did use in my cover letter some of the stuff relating to networks that I do, like thinking about networks. And of course, when you're talking about flights, for when I was at Swiss, this is kind of interesting to them. Although in practice, I didn't really have to use it so much, just maybe at most for like a bit of visualization here and there. For the work I do for Google, there's no practical use for me, although I know people on other teams are using some more like SNA techniques. Aside from that, one thing that I think is maybe underestimated is that with networks, I was thinking more about like emergence and not just thinking like either very high level or interpersonal level. I think that not everyone really thinks this way, coming from like psychology backgrounds or economics backgrounds. And so thinking about that also really helps me, especially when thinking about setting up experiments, like what is really our target population, or what kind of effects are we interested in? Like, do we care about a specific population that we're targeting, or do we want to know what the impact is for the whole product, let's say?
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. How about you, Antonio?
Well, looking back, I think that the most useful strategy, which eventually became a skill, was to position myself as someone who could translate complex analysis into policy. I think that bridge is it's key in my sector and in all these organizations when it comes to international development, multilateralism. During the PhD, I built a mixed methods portfolio, network analysis, other types of statistical modeling, but also qualitative field work. I think knowledge and skills on how to build a survey, how to include inputs from different interested parties is also key. But at the same time, to keep those instruments very simple to run, very simple for the people to use, and most importantly in my sector is that they have to be flexible to be understood across different cultures, different nations. So that gave me the practical experience that perhaps matter more than publications when applying to multilateral institutions. And networking also play a huge role if you want to have a professional experience outside academia. That is conferences, workshops, and even informal conversations also often open the doors. So I will complement a little bit what Kieran says in terms of having all these qualitative and quantitative skills is very important, but don't keep for granted that you also need to network, that you need to go there to those conferences to talk to your colleagues and see what is going on there. So after my PhD, as I mentioned, I applied to these institutions, and pretty much all these more soft skills really helped me to get one step inside.
Nice. That's very interesting. And perhaps following in that line of reasoning, if you could rewind time a little bit, would there be one thing that you would, for instance, try to focus more in either building the soft skills, such as networking and capabilities for a bridge between analysis and policy, or, as Kieran said, like focusing a bit more on general ability to program or do things like causal inference? What would you guys say would be the thing that you would perhaps give a little bit more time in hindsight?
So I'm actually going to reflect a lot of what Antonio's just said. So for me, ironically, I always found networking a little bit dirty. I hated the self-promotion aspects of it. And I think, well, maybe I'm just not gifted at networking, but I also didn't practice it very much. And I do think that could have been an advantage, especially looking at like how I've ended up in the jobs I've ended up in. Also the things that I've interviewed for, it's mostly been through networks. And I think that's maybe even more true now that the job market is a little bit tighter, because there's a lot of people with the skills out there, and it's a matter of like connecting them to the jobs. And it's also like the networking aspect also reduces the information mismatch. Like, if you send out your CV and it goes through HR, where HR isn't necessarily expert, they can also filter you out on the wrong things. Whereas if you know someone who knows what your skill set is in more depth because they come from a similar specialization, they can be a bit more, they can be a better judge, and also, then that can help you through in the process. And I will also absolutely say that again, like Antonio is very right in that you need to be able to simplify things. And again, this is something that I didn't do naturally. I felt like if I simplified things, I was obscuring what's true or not allowing people to make their own judgments where like failures in my thought might be. But people are getting millions of bits of information from research, And if they have to consider all of this complexity too, it just fades into the background. So you need to apply kind of your best judgment on like, what is the actual implication here? I kind of wish that I'd practiced that a bit more. And I think a good way to practice that is probably also by stepping outside your field a bit, because if you're talking to peers, they often will understand a lot of the things you're saying. Whereas if you step outside that a bit more, then they're not going to understand a lot of the things that are going into this. And maybe that forces you also to do some of the simplification already. Yeah, I'm just thinking if there's anything else there. I mean, more on a practical side, I think my job search, I started off very narrow. I knew that data science was like the booming thing, so I was mostly looking for like data science jobs. Data scientists, I found in interviews, could range from data engineering, where you're literally just clearing a data pipeline in some way, through to, implementing machine learning techniques in like the more complex black boxy sense, rather than what, like sometimes machine learning is just logistic regression. So that like term in itself was kind of broad and not very useful sometimes, although it hits a lot of jobs, but you also need to think about like alternatives for it. And I would say that's probably also a good use for LLMs at the moment, is to like try and find parallel kinds of jobs that use similar skill sets. For me, I ended up going for several more like product analyst, data analyst, business intelligence analyst, that type of stuff, human factors analysts, these kinds of things that weren't so obvious to me at first. So I think those are big things. I also think, I mean, if you're mobile, that's also a big help. That's not something I would have done differently. Like I made choices for good reasons. But I do think that being mobile will help you to take the opportunities as they fit you. Also, especially if you're applying kind of outside your network, then you can maybe fill something that's a bit more niche more easily.
Great, thanks. This is very sort of insightful, because a lot of the things, especially from my perspective, as being sort of a bit of a one-trick pony, in that I had started with academic jobs, then continued with academic jobs, and then complemented that here and there with some more academic jobs on the side. So those are the things that are almost like beyond the horizons of my imagination. And I guess it's really great that we can also give this to this wide variety of considerations and possibilities and opportunities to our audience. So thanks for that. And how about you, Antonio? What would be the one thing that you would perhaps hit the revise and resubmit decision on yourself or on your past self, and tell him to do a bit more or focus a bit more on?
Yeah, good question. That is what would I do differently, essentially. I don't know. I will start. In my career, at some point, when I started the PhD, at some point I thought, okay, I'm going to stay in academia, right? But if I had a chance to do something differently, I would start preparing for non-academic careers earlier in your PhD. I didn't realize how many opportunities exist in development banks, international organizations, data for policy roles that pretty much they welcome research-heavy profiles. So one of my advice for those early researchers that are thinking beyond academia, it's you have to translate your academic experience into the languages of these fields. So, for example, instead of saying I run a complex model, you can say I designed a decision support tool. Instead of saying I coach interview data, you can say I manage a stakeholder engagement. So tailor your applications to the institutional culture that you would like to apply. For example, in my case, at the OECD in Paris, they want comparability and indicators. Okay, so there you have two pillars where you can focus on. At the Inter-American Development Bank, they want implementation and value for money. There you go. Those two very important aspects for you to consider. At the UNDP, they want human development framing. So that is a little bit more into the realm of philosophy. What are the human rights? What does development means beyond economic growth? So this would be one of the things that I would love that I knew before starting applying. But it's one of those things that you learn as you go, and that is good that we have this sort of opportunity to share these experiences with young researchers.
I'd just like to follow up quickly on what Antonio is saying. That definitely, I think, being a lot more outcome focused is important also for your CV, rather than saying I did model XYZ, and unless maybe you're going for something that's more like on the side where the model itself is the important thing, or model implementation is the important thing. Yeah, you need to be able to say like, this is the decision I helped support, or this is the product that I helped roll out in some way. And yeah, you can hint that you're good at these things too, but that shouldn't be like the first part of the sentence. That should be the bit at the end, like I did X by doing Y. And I think also here, again, as Antonio said, you should really tailor your language to the institutional culture, as he put it. Like, different things get different names in different places, and LLMs again maybe are useful for this. For like, okay, how would they refer to this in this field? That just because you don't realize that your skill set can be applicable to other places too, and maybe you miss something important that way, where you could have actually been really good at this job, and you maybe don't even realize that you would be.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. That's super interesting. Before we move on to the next set of questions, we actually have a question from Alvaro in the chat. So Alvaro, if you don't mind, you can just unmute yourself and ask the question, because I think that one is interesting in that it goes even deeper in this line of reasoning that we unpacked here about the soft skills.
Yes, because I was really curious in the different things that you have touched so far, and it's more about the soft skills that you gain during the PhD that you can either use or can be a drawback in going to the industry. As an example, I have this, like, I guess that people that come from this PhD background are more critical about the results and try to dig more in the outcomes and the results compared to other profiles. I would like to have some hints about these soft skills that you think that come from the PhD and are helpful, and maybe some that are not really helpful in some sense for the daily jobs.
So my first thought here is, well, yeah, when you're talking about like how critically you look at the data or results, you also have to consider that you're probably working on a lot of projects at the same time. You need to prioritize. So maybe if you've got a product that's launching that, like 30 people are going to be involved in supporting or developing further, then you need to be a bit more critical than if it's some tiny wording change that might impact a few users, but also is probably not going to make or break a product. So there's a lot about prioritization, which, to be quite honest, I probably could have done more of in my PhD as well, and not treating each piece of knowledge as equally valuable or informative. But yeah, definitely that I think is something I'm still in the process of learning, but that's definitely really valuable now.
Thanks. Antonio, would you have anything to add to that, or?
Not really. I think, soft skills, you can, well, I'll just add a little bit more about this, but, soft skills, in my experience, when I was doing a PhD, I was just, it's a very lowly path. You usually focus on many projects and you just want to deliver, right? You just want to be as much as effective, but having the opportunities to attend a conference, to have experience to visit other universities and see how these other colleagues were doing research and how they present their results. I think that really opened like a different perspective for me on how to engage with your PhD. Engage with your PhD is not at the end just to submit your thesis, make some publications, and then stay in academia. It has so many other different directions that it can take. And I think coming back again with what I mentioned previously, a big turning point for me was this experience at Yale, where I met all these researchers that they were doing research with industrial implications. And they were really thinking about, market and profits and patents. And it was a very sort of completely different approach from what I was experiencing back in London, in a more kind of like a little bit more theoretical PhD, political science, more public policy orientated. But that sort of connection, that bridging these two worlds, that was really enlightening to me. And I think that really motivated me to learn more about how to develop soft skills that allows me to, as it was mentioned, to learn how to talk with people from different professions, with different backgrounds, and to tell your story with different narratives, in different shapes, because that really allows you to create connections with other people. When we're talking about social network analysis, for us it's very intuitive, but for so many other people, it is a little bit complicated. So I think this type of soft skills that you can gain throughout your PhD are really, really important. It's a good complement besides everything else what you're doing.
Great, thanks. Again, we have perhaps dipped into the next question a little bit with discussing the different sort of languages in different fields and in different areas of human activity. But the question that I'm now sort of opening up is, what would you think were the biggest and perhaps even the most surprising differences between your current jobs and between your PhD or your academic experience? And what were perhaps the most surprising similarities? So what sort of just caught you a little bit by surprise when you started doing your non-academic jobs?
So for me, I think communication is the important thing here. Like you're working with a lot more people. You also are dependent on a lot more people, and a lot more people are dependent on you, for your timelines on everything. I mean, at any given moment, I might be working on 3 to 5 different research projects, and they all have turnaround times of 2-3 months. And they're often very simple conceptually, but you're juggling a lot of things, and you need to check in with people. Like when you make a brief decision, there might be someone who has a lot more context than you, or there might be someone who will need to implement some change back end somewhere that affects what timeline you're going to be able to run your analysis on, or run your study on. Bad communication, it can mean that you end up with an experiment that launches not on the set of people that you expected it to, or it's not triggering correctly, or you're held up just because your data's not there in time to make a decision for when something should be launched. And yeah, again, you really need to adjust your communication, considering the other's motivations a bit more. If I want to ask an engineer about a trigger implementation or a survey implementation, I need to think a bit more about maybe I need to be a bit more precise about, a question ordering issue or something like that, because these aren't things that they've been taught about, and it's not really their job. So you kind of maybe skip a couple of steps normally in your communication with other academics, because you all have a shared base of knowledge, and you just can't assume that now. So it's adjusting your communication and doing a lot of communication are the biggest things. The pace is much higher. I'm not sure if that's surprising, really, which does mean that, you sometimes sacrifice a bit of depth, but you're much closer to your product generally than or at least in my experience, than in academia. In a sense, you use proxies, you have more room to do experiments rather than using observational data, which Yeah, I mean, you sacrifice a little bit of depth, but there's often more room to iterate on something. So maybe you're not 100% convinced by a result, but there's probably going to be another study where you can kind of shore this up afterwards or validate something that you've already done. And I think something that I miss is that you don't find as much time to spend actively learning. You know, during my PhD, I could quite happily go down a rabbit hole of something for a few days, which ultimately results in nothing. And I can't do that very much anymore. You know, you need to justify why you're doing things. And yeah, I mean, related to that, you need to think about how you're investing your time much more. Yes, again, this is a skill that would have been useful during my PhD too. It took me pretty much the maximum time I could take to finish my PhD, in part because of this. But I think it's much more explicitly valued that you prioritize well in a non-academic setting, because you just need to finish things. You need to have some way to make a decision, and some data is generally going to be better than no data. So you need to get it out there.
Great, thanks. How about you, Antonio, again?
Yes, I would say the biggest difference from what I have perceived is its ownership of the research agenda, right? I mean, in academia, you define your questions, your research questions. In multilateral organizations, your work is shaped by organizational priorities and political timing. Just as it was mentioned, you also work on a much faster timelines, sometimes weeks rather than months, because that is how things operate in these organizations. There's a lot of tight deadlines. Another surprise was how relational the work is. We were mentioning this before. Diplomacy, negotiations, and coordination matters as much as technical skills. And the impact of your work is measured differently, right? Not only on publications, but on whether a government use ultimately your findings. I think that's the big bar where we aim. And when it comes to similarity between my work in academia, much of the analytical backbone, it's pretty much the same. You know, I still build data sets. I run models. I frame some of the research questions that are gonna eventually be shaped by the agenda of my office. I write evidence-based analysis, and throughout these organizations, the rigor it's very high, because findings they feed into flagship reports or policy decisions. So pretty much for me, the similarities are in that sense, that eventually you're dealing with data, you're using your models, that at some point you have to explain them and you have to show them what it is about. And that brings me again to the very important skill, that is to learn how to explain complex findings into lay language for different audiences, especially non-expert audiences. And for me, one of the main challenges is that everything that I do, I have to explain it for policymakers with so many constraints. One of them is that they don't have time to understand you fully. They don't have the resources to play along to what you're proposing. So you have to double think what exactly you're going to tell them and what is the trajectory. And the third constraint is that they just want very, very explicit directions of what to do. So that brings a lot of burden as a policy analyst, research analyst to us, because definitely, I mean, we are not oracles. We don't have all the answers, and every country operates in a different way. They have different contexts. So that is the type of pressure that we have. But for me, those are the main differences and similarities with academia, Tom.
Great. Thanks. We have one more question in the chat by Siu. So Siu, again, if you want, just unmute yourself and ask.
Yes, thank you. I think the question more towards Antonio, because when you mentioned that you also got the opportunity to meet other people like outside academia to get this during the attendance of the conferences or events. But I don't know whether this is the field differences, because I feel like for my area is that when I go to a conference, that's more like researchers and research scientists only. So I feel like it's hard to meet those people outside my current bubble. Yeah. Or what was your experience more specifically? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You, thank you so much for that question. I think in my case, what I did, and this was actually a suggestion from one of my supervisors, was to apply to interdisciplinary conferences involving, government representatives, private sectors, talking about big issues around the topics that we were exploring back then. I think if you go to this type of conference, that's the excellent opportunity. That's the perfect venue for you to start outreaching a little bit out from your bubble of researchers and talk with, more practitioner profiles. And I did that with a couple of conferences in my field. And also because, my topic lent itself to that type of experiences of, getting on board with people from the government, private sector providers. So that really helped me as well to learn the language, to learn what exactly they're interested in, and trying to, to strike the balance between academia, what I want to tell them, and how to make attractive my project. So that would be my suggestion. I know that at certain fields, their conferences and some of the events are very, very focused or centered to one topic. That's okay. That's good, because that's going to enrich your work. But if you have the opportunity as well, and I think this is something that many supervisors will support, apply to other type of conference, other experiences that are not necessarily 100% focused on your research topic.
Great, thanks a lot. So I think we have gotten through all the questions that we had sort of prepared for today. We also managed to address the two questions from the members of our audience. So I think we can start wrapping up. But before we bid each other farewell and enjoy the rest of our days, do you have any sort of closing words, remarks, things that we might have not addressed here that you would like to sort of just put out there, Kieran and Antonio?
Antonio, do you want to go first on this one if you've got something?
Yes, definitely. I think what I would say is it's social analysis and all the areas around this methodology were just great. I mean, this is something that I really enjoyed the most. I didn't mention this, but I went to a summer school in Essex. And they provide network analysis, basic network analysis, and advanced social network analysis with exponential random graph models and all this, right? So that was just great, but also that allowed me to meet other types of researchers and other methodologies. But what I want to say is that, perhaps as my concluding remark, is that sometimes we tend to see this methodology as something that is very simple, and I already mentioned this. But for other people, it's not. One disadvantage is that social analysis can seem too technical or too abstract, if not translated into actionable insights. In my experience in policy environments, people don't want a network diagram, to be very honest. And that was something that when I was studying, it was amazing. I love the network diagrams. But they want to know what they should do with that. Another challenge is that data availability as well. Outside academia, you often need to build the data yourself, especially if you want to have this picture of social dynamics, flows of information, resources, and so on. So I think this methodology is amazing. It's great that it works for us, but it's also important to know how to use it and how to put it in the table when you're discussing big projects. I will conclude with that, guys.
Thanks a lot. Kieran, any concluding remarks?
Yeah, again, I think Antonio is really hitting the important stuff here, that you need to think mostly about like how you communicate things. You have good skills, but they're often too complicated for people to understand. Often a bar chart is what people will want to see if they want to see data. So you need to simplify, you need to focus on outcomes. And if you're worried about certainty, communicate uncertainty in some way, give yourself an error bar, something like that. But don't overcomplicate with whole models.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, guys, this was tremendous. I myself have learned a lot, so I hope that the people who in passing joined us or who will be then reviewing the recording will also learn at the very least as much as I did, because this was really illuminating, and I really appreciate both of you joining us. Thanks again. It was really great to talking to both of you. And I guess that is it. That concludes our today's session.